We're very close.
Probably wouldn't have told me.
1 minute.
Because it takes away this
Okay.
fatigue.
Okay.
So we'll do
Your spouse is here.
testing 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3. Give me a
Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
Okay,
Testing 1 2 3.
that's good. She'll give me the high sign and then we'll be a go. And we have no intro music because somebody stole our desk.
We're gonna have to get
Low
back up.
rent radio.
Yeah, low rent radio. I just loved it so much. Disappeared.
Greetings to everybody. Welcome to Lansing Online News Radio. I would give you a little bit of intro music, but I'd have to hum it, and Bill and I would try to come up with a tune. We somehow can't seem to find the disc of music that my husband made for us, so we'll just get started. This is Lansing Online News Radio. I am Bonnie Buckaroo. We're here at WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, broadcasting from Lansing Community College down in the basement. We invite you also to stop by our webcast. If you go to www.lansingonlinenews.com, you will see a link to previous shows and also to our current shows so that you can go online. We're on Ustream TV online, so you can watch us and listen to us at the same time. We have kind of an interesting show tonight. We're going to start with Bill and I are going to do our version of Tim Skubik's Off the Record and give you our analysis of last night's debate, and we may even invite some of our guests to chime in if they so want to. Go over a little bit too about what the news is in the community and what new news we have on Lansing Online News. Then we're going to be joined by Dr. Mujib Hourani from Michigan State University's Department of Anthropology. We're going to continue part of a conversation we've had on the concerns about a sort of rising tide of Islamophobia that's taking place in the culture, and what are some of the positive things that are happening, what are some of the negative things that are happening. Then we're going to be joined by two authors from Grand Rapids, both of whom were postal workers, and they write about work and working. And it's going to be Kevin Breen and Patrick Cook, and they're going to be joining us and talking. I think it's so great when we have authors who are writing about their experience, and their experience is not being a college professor of English, which is all too often the only people who write novels or books nowadays, it seems. Greetings, Bill. What's new at your end of the world?
What's new at my end? Yesterday I posted an interesting item on mintonlit.com, which is my literary blog, about a woman who has written a book. It's a memoir. She's from Hope College, a professor. She has an interesting malady where she cannot recognize faces, and her memoir takes off on that. But the New York Times gave it a full-page review yesterday, which is pretty special.
Wow. So she's more like one of the cases that Dr. Oliver Sacks talks about?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly that style case. And she doesn't whine a lot about it because she felt that it was sort of balanced her dysfunctional family. Her family her father was an alcoholic cross-dresser, her mother was schizophrenic, and then she married an alcoholic. So this sort of gave her balance in life. Nothing really, annoyed her.
So she was fairly happy if she didn't recognize them?
I think so. I don't know. But no, she actually writes like that. She has a sense of humor.
There are people in my family I'd be very glad if I didn't recognize them anymore. Maybe it's a disease I could acquire.
It's possible. We could talk to her. She'll be at Schuler's a week from Monday.
A week from Monday.
Yeah, it's too bad. She's here at the same time we're on.
Another interesting thing that's coming up in the community on October 21st at 7 o'clock, for those of you who are interested, is that Lansing Eastern High School is going to be open for a tour for alumni. The Greater Lansing Historical Society has gotten together with the Alumni Association, and they're going to do a tour of the facility so that people can relive some of their high school experiences. I can't imagine a worse thing to do, but those who are interested might want to know about that.
It's like the ultimate class reunion.
It is the ultimate class reunion, and it would be everybody from all the ages, I guess, who would show up for that. I have had no inkling to go to any class reunions. You ever been to one?
I've been to one, right.
Yeah, well, that was the last.
I've been to one, right.
Never again.
And after that, I'm not sure our class even bothered to try. We had a small class.
How small?
48 kids.
Wow, that is small. What school?
Essexville St. John. That does not include the young women who were pregnant, so they were kicked out at that time.
Oh, I thought maybe they were counted twice.
No.
Well, very interesting. No, college and high school reunions are an interesting phenomenon. I'm not
Well,
quite
that's a good topic because this weekend, of course, is homecoming, which is supposedly the college reunion traditionally for people who went to MSU.
Yeah, I was sitting out once while listening to a group of returning MSU students from a fraternity say awful things one day while I was sitting at the peanut barrel outside on a homecoming weekend. One of the students from one of the frats that these gentlemen, the returning frat brothers, were back from, was talking about how they had hired a young man to come and mow their lawn every Saturday, and that they were paying him $15 a week, and he was a young African-American kid from Lansing, and boasting to his elders, the young man from the frat said, and we gave him a bad check. And because we knew that we could get away with it, because if he ever went to the prosecutor, who would the prosecutor believe? The kid from Lansing or us? And I came really close to getting in their face, but then again realized there were many more of them than there was of me. And I thought, what an awful thing to say. This was about 10 years ago, and it's stuck with me ever since. So I don't have good fond memories of homecoming days.
Well, people get together and recollect things that mostly didn't happen.
I think that's true, too. I suspect that story was embellished.
Yeah.
Although why you'd want to do it in that direction,
Why you'd
I
want to
can't
even
imagine.
mention it is a little embarrassing.
Well, the good news is Lansing Online News has a number of new contributors. We have it's been great.
You don't have to write anymore. You can't find time.
Our experiment in citizen journalism has found a bunch of journalists. Therese Daw has a great article. I really enjoyed it on death and dying. She's worked at a hospice. She understands those issues very well. I just think we have Nathan Triplett from East Lansing wrote I thought a really well-reasoned piece on why it is that we shouldn't fire Andrew Sherville, the Assistant Attorney General.
He's going to be a good lawyer.
He is going to be a good lawyer, and I think he's got quite a political career coming up as well.
I think so, too.
Speaking of political careers, how could we resist discussing last night's debate? So what were your impressions, Bill?
It begins with a B and ends with a G.
Would it have
boring.
an O-R-I in the middle?
Boring.
Mm-hmm.
That was maybe one of the worst debates I've ever seen.
Now, whose fault was that?
I think it was a debate that Snyder probably wanted to have.
He wanted it boring?
Yeah, he wanted it boring, so that would be his fault also, but Vernero was the one that didn't really take it to him very well.
Well, I was also disappointed in the questioners.
Oh, terrible. But that's typical.
Well, is it typical?
I think it is. I think it's gotten to that level where they ask benign questions.
Stephen Henderson from the Free Press editorial page, he's the editorial page editor, and then the Detroit News editorial page editor, Nolan Finley. I mean, there was a time in this state where those two newspapers had a tremendous rivalry, and they were very exciting publications because they really kept each other sharp, I think, in a way. And instead what we got were these predictable, plodding sort of questions like, basically, so tell us about your stand again on education. And so
it was sing-songy almost, too. They really were.
I even watched the analysis on Off the Record afterwards with Skubik, and I thought that was about as predictable as it could get as well. I mean, there was nothing exciting there. I keep thinking that even within the constraints of the rules, and the rules were confining, there were interesting questions that could have been posed. We live in a state where the Tea Party really was exploded on the scene. Bill and I went down there in April on tax day, all of a sudden stunned to see thousands of people show up at the Capitol.
It was a massive rally.
It was huge. And there was all that energy in the air as they thought they were going to take over. Now, why would you not ask Rick Snyder what kind of relationship does he expect to have with the Tea Party?
Absolutely. The other thing that's really interesting, I think, about how these debates go is you can cheat. You don't have to follow the rules. What are they going to do?
Right.
Throw you out? I've been involved with debates where people sort of cheated for ends, and they were a lot more interesting. They just ignored the rules.
Right, the rules are that you're not
are
supposed to ask each other questions,
right.
But why didn't Bernero break the rules
I
and
have
ask?
no clue why. He was being a gentle person, I guess. He was a national champion debater.
Bernero was?
From his college. He went to either Hope or a smaller college, but he won the national championship as a debater. You would have not known that last night.
I think his people were concerned that if he did, he would be perceived as too angry, and he's trying to live down some of that Lansing's angriest mayor label. But at the same time, one of the questions that we had was, I was pleased to see somebody ask Snyder about his positions on some social issues, because even though it's jobs, 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 I think people need to know that he is indeed pro-life and he is against gay marriage. But I was very interested to see him qualify. I thought he qualified his pro-life position more than you see most Republicans do nowadays, where he not only said that he would grant exceptions for rape and incest, but also for health of the mother. And that's going pretty far for most pro-life candidates nowadays. The question that I have is, and I don't understand why there are no follow-ups, because I think Bernero is counting on that for a certain amount of the women's vote, is then, and will you be willing to veto any legislation that comes in that is stricter than that?
Right.
Because
You don't
the
get
governor
those kind
doesn't
of
propose
questions, right?
legislation.
I think debates are almost worthless now. I really do, because of the rules they set up. They're over controlled. The kind of question, how long the question can be.
They're not debates.
They're not debates.
But I do think
they're hardly discussions.
we had at Michigan State University last night, I gave extra credit to some of my Intro to Mass Media students, some extra credit if they wanted to come in and watch the debate. And we have iClickers, which allow us to ask them questions and then get immediate response, and it's also a sneaky way to take attendance. So then you don't have to pass the list around.
It's also the #1 selling item on Amazon for a while.
Was it? Okay,
Yeah.
those iClickers?
iClickers.
Yeah. What fascinated me was that I asked them afterwards during a debriefing as well whether they wanted, Snyder seemed to emphasize the fact he wanted civility, and he wanted to have just positive talk. He didn't want to criticize his opponent. And I said, some of the students had said afterwards that they were a little concerned about Bernero being a little bit too mean and angry. And I said, well, do you want them to be civil or do you want them to mix it up? And the vast majority wanted them to mix it up. They said that really they still believe in the conflict model where somehow some sort of truth will come from that. So I was kind of surprised that they didn't want civility.
Maybe they should have been asking the questions.
I think it would have been a better debate.
There's a point where a lot of journalists have refused to be the moderators on debates because they know they're benign. They just don't matter.
Well, you can only get a bad press out of it, usually.
Yep.
I asked my students as well how many of them had changed, because many of them will be first-time voters this fall. They're freshmen and they're turning 18. Most of them are 18, and this is their big chance to vote. And I said, how many of them had changed their mind as a result of the debate? Came in leaning toward one candidate and now lean toward another. Out of the roughly 90 students, only 2 had changed their mind. And those 2 had been Snyder fans who now said they had not known much about Bernero but kind of liked him. I think they also appreciated the sort of shout-out to college students that he gave about 3/4 of the way through the debate. But it was interesting. Bernero's going to need a lot more of a pickup than that.
It's 20 points down. 3 weeks out, even if there's a 5-point difference, it's 15 points. I don't see where there's anything going to happen in that period of time. But you can't outspend him. Snyder will outspend him if there's any time left to be bought.
Well, who's buying in this election? Who's buying?
We won't know until it's over, though. But
We
it's
won't, really.
probably a lot of outsiders. You'll see a lot of outsider issues.
So to whose benefit? I mean, who's going to be the logical candidates to be pumping money into this race? You don't even see it covered on the national scene. I think they're more interested in more colorful candidates across the country. Snyder has a huge lead, so there doesn't seem to be
There's no
much
reason
need.
to pour money into this race at all. So you don't see anybody visiting here. I don't think there's been anybody out stumping for anybody really of any import, has there?
Well,
We haven't noticed it in Lansing anyway here.
The president's not coming in to stump for Bernero, so that's not going to happen. I thought the one interesting fact that came out last night in the post-game analysis was that mayors don't get elected governor in our state. It's been more than 100 years since one has been elected governor, and even so, in the past, when they did in the past, they came out of Detroit. They didn't come out of
Right.
a town the size of
But
Lansing.
Bernero's been a senator and a representative, but he's a sitting mayor, so he's kind of lost his value, I guess.
See, I find that ironic,
So do
because
I,
you'd think
because-
you'd want somebody who had some administrative experience running a large bureaucracy. That would be an advantage, one would think.
I know I saw one newscaster said that Snyder seemed to be the perennial accountant or something of that nature.
Ah, that's how he came across.
Yeah.
Boy, I think his
He was a CFO, so.
when you have a 20-some point lead, you're as bland as you can be, I think, if you're smart. I think the only issue that in some ways really had some traction with my students was the idea that they needed more debates. For many of them, this was their first look at both candidates. They thought they knew more about Snyder, but they hadn't really heard him speak. And so they were really eager, even though they found the debate itself dull. What they really wanted was some sort of additional opportunity for the two to have a debate and ask each other questions.
And we're not going to get that.
Doesn't it seem that this is a huge change in elections in the United States overall? One of the things that we're seeing now is someone like the Tea Party candidates, Sharon Angle out in Nevada and so forth, simply avoiding all national and mainstream media. I mean, they either go on Fox or they don't go on TV at all, and that's the extent of it. So, I mean, that's news.
Oh, that's absolute news. I know back when I was working in the political system, there were probably 5, 6 debates. There'd be one in UP, one in Grand Rapids, one in Lansing, one in Detroit, and then one somewhere else. I mean, there were a lot of debates.
And the League of Women Voters would always hold
The
one.
League of Women Voters would hold one.
And they were usually lucky enough to get all of the candidates to show up. And somebody rightfully posted on Facebook this morning that there are indeed 5 people running for governor, not just 2.
Right. They never let, or very seldom ever
They
let,
never do.
the peripheral candidates.
And one of the challenges when they don't do that is that there may well be another interesting alternative that people would look at seriously, but they'll never get the opportunity to find out.
No,
And I think that's a
absolutely, and they get no exposure.
When I ran for Congress back in 2000, I used to periodically dress my husband up in a Jesse Ventura bald wig, make him wear a feather boa, and we would stand outside of Channel 10 protesting the fact that they would not, and I said, if Jesse lived here, he would have never made it as governor because they wouldn't give us any airtime. They
I
were
forgot
holding
that, but
debates
I
with the other candidates, but not us.
What did you have to give him to make him do that? Or did he just do it for fun? I remember during one election cycle, Jim Blanchard against, I think it was probably John Engler, they had the duck people following Jim Blanchard.
The duck people, yes.
It was an environmental issue. They got arrested several times, but they're always out there.
What does one get arrested for? Is it illegal to wear a duck suit?
They crossed some lines, and I don't know. I couldn't tell you what it was. I always used to go out and talk with them. They're kind of interesting people, but somehow they did something wrong and they got arrested at one site. But they were just out there and they, quack and would do duck things.
It's a whole bunch better than these manufactured town halls with, I mean, might as well hire actors, which I guess they're now down into doing. I see that commercial coming out of, what was it, Tennessee, where they advertised for Hicks.
Yeah.
So they hired some actors to play some Hicks. Oh, God. It's our political theater has gotten to be more theater than political.
It really has. But Jesse Ventura is a good one, though.
He portrayed
that's
that
that's one of the things. Neither of them pulled out a prop, an unauthorized prop, which was
right.
Nobody's gonna say you can't do that.
But remember when Rick DeFazio went after Hillary Clinton when she was running for senator, and he came over with his, will you sign my list of things and my no tax pledge? It cost him more than it cost
You know why?
her.
I think because he approached her.
So men coming at a woman?
You don't do that. Yeah, he should have stayed back. He would have been probably okay. But yeah, that did not work.
No.
But I've seen a lot of violations of the rules. They have something in their pocket or whatever and pull it out.
I don't see why he didn't just turn to Mr. Snyder and say, why won't you debate me?
Yeah.
I think the voters of Michigan, ask him directly instead of saying it into the camera. The other thing that I thought was somewhat surprising, if you're telling me that Bernero's that good a debater, is he seemed to be looking at his notes frequently, whereas Snyder did not. And I was surprised at that.
Right.
Did he think it was a radio debate?
I'm not sure. And I was even surprised when I saw they were going to allow him to have notes.
Okay.
Most of the time, you do not have notes. And one of the big violations in debates are somebody comes up before that and allows you to write something on a piece of paper, but you're not supposed to take notes to a podium with you in a lot of debates. You're supposed to do this extemporaneously.
Well, you're listening to Lansing Online News Radio here at WLNZ 89.7, and I think it's now time for us to leave the debates behind. It would be fun if we had more to look forward to, but I don't think we're going to get one.
It's over.
It's over. And the fat lady is not only singing, but the Dems are giving other people the money.
Right, exactly.
So
It'll run other places.
Mr. Bernero's funding is going to dry up unless there's a huge spike in the polls in the next day or so. The problem was if the debate is a draw, Bernero loses because he needed a knockout punch.
Can't be done.
Can't be done. Too late, eh?
No, can't be done.
Well, it's the old line that unless your opponent is found with a dead woman or in bed with a dead woman or a live boy, it's all over. So that's about it.
Except in Chicago.
Well, that's true. You can resurrect a few people to vote for you there. We're now going to be joined by Dr. Najib Hourani, and it's good to have you here.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate. You're here with the Department of Anthropology at Michigan State University.
Mm-hmm.
And we invited you here because last week we had started a conversation with two students from the Islamic Center about some of the challenges that the Islamic community in Michigan and around the country is facing with what appears to be a rising tide of Islamophobia.
Right.
We had just talked about Sharon Engel, who's running for the Senate out in Nevada, and she had just recently said that Dearborn is one of two places in the country now it's falling under Sharia law.
Right. And the other place was someplace in Texas, right?
Texas
small
or
town
Florida?
in Texas that no
I'd
longer
never,
exists.
I'd
or
never
something.
even heard of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I have heard of Dearborn.
Dearborn I've heard of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Been there.
And I think that had something to do with when they were hosting the Islamic festival, they had asked some people passing out Christian literature to stop obstructing the sidewalk, and when they didn't do it, they were arrested. And that was her in St. I think that is where she came up with this.
Oh, in Dearborn.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Was that the incident that prompted this, you think?
I can't be in her mind, but it seems like I can't imagine she would be able to target a specific instance in Dearborn, but I think it probably just comes out of the general fear, the saleability of fear as a political tool. So I doubt that she had actually a specific instance, or she just knew Dearborn, probably, and.
There is this undercurrent in the culture among a certain group, that is, there is this fear of Sharia law. Now, what is it about Sharia law that is so worrisome to this group? What is it that they think would happen? Do we know where this is coming from?
Well, I think we're starting to find out. It's been for some time sort of circulating since obviously since 9/11. Fear of Islam has grown tremendously, but it always existed prior to that as well. The specific forms that it's taking right now, I think, are directly related to the election of Barack Obama and larger political gains in the United States. I'm not sure that it's actually a cultural phenomenon. I think it's more instrumental use of misinformation to create the kinds of fear that we see. And when you can, the idea of Sharia law is a little bit misleading. What we're really talking about is sort of practices of jurisprudence, right? It's not like there is one law that's set down and immutable for all time, but it's a practice of interpretation, reinterpretation.
It's common law. Yeah.
It's it's not exactly common law, but it's akin to that. It's a living, changing thing. But you can always go back to a religious text, and you can find a passage in which something rather reprehensible is written, and then you use that to sort of be the metaphor for all Islamic law. But it doesn't really exist as such. I mean, as with any religious tradition, things are interpreted in at times that might be reprehensible, and things are interpreted out at other times. And the same thing is true of Islam. But it's particularly potent politically today to point to those things. I don't know if you had the opportunity to watch Christiane Amanpour's thing on ABC News. They had this week.
No, this week, no, I didn't see it.
It's a very interesting thing. It's sort of a roundtable discussion with some people, and unfortunately titled, "Should Americans Fear Islam?"
Not a loaded question.
No, not at all. But it had, some people who were saying, no, we should not be doing this, and then of course there were some of the people who are really pushing this idea that Islam is trying to take over America. And it was, to see those people just go back and cherry pick from religious traditions what they found, what they believe would be the most terrifying aspects to Americans, and then make those stand in for an entire living tradition, or series of living traditions, actually. I mean, there's no such thing as Islam as such. And the kind of Islam that you find in Africa is different from the kind you'll find in Saudi Arabia, which is different from the kind you find in South Lebanon or the Bronx. So, this idea that there's this huge monolithic thing and it's going to impose this restrictive religious, law on Americans.
There actually was
Reminds
a
me of
year or
Catholicism.
there actually was a year or so ago a movement in England. England toyed around with the idea that in certain neighborhoods, things like property disputes and so forth in Islamic communities should be allowed to use their traditions rather than to use our courts, because many of those cases were going to the elders in the community as opposed to the courts anyhow.
Right.
So they were arguing that maybe they should start certifying those decisions as being legally binding.
Right.
And that led to a discussion. I think that somewhat prompted a lot of this paranoia that the judicial traditions of a Western culture were under assault from this new type of law.
Mm-hmm.
As you're right, I mean, then you start looking at things like women being stoned or arms being cut off and hands being cut off as part of some traditions in some remote tribes, and all of a sudden it's easy to use that as a political wedge issue.
Yeah, yeah.
This is not unusual throughout history, regardless of religion, though. It's when they're used as a political tool, isn't that right?
Oh,
I mean, this
absolutely.
is something that's pretty common
Yeah, yeah.
in recorded history.
Right. I mean, what was it? Praise God and pass the ammunition. These two things go together all too frequently: politics, militarization, war, and religion.
What recourse, though? I mean, it seems to me very strange that an actual candidate from one of the major parties running for the Senate would say something about how a city in the United States is falling under Sharia law, and somehow it's treated as if that is, it just seems to me so nonsensical. That is there any way that the system seems incapable of dealing with people that are that far beyond the pale? In the past, I don't think they ever got to the microphone.
That's true, and these people coming forward now is really the result of a long process of a political process that's been institutionalized amongst the American right wing, and we can talk about that in a second, because I think it's incredibly important. But it goes back to the issue you were talking about with the debates, right? And the debates and how sort of silly the questioning is. What is the relationship between the media and political power in this country?
Yeah.
These reporters, these editors, they will not ask a tough question for fear of losing access. And that's really the fundamental tool that, especially since Vietnam, the American government and the people that populate it have discovered they can use. So Engel might say something absolutely absurd, like this small town that doesn't exist in Texas is fallen under Islamic law, and nobody's got the guts to actually ask her about that, right?
Or she can duck them.
Or yeah, she'll split, and so she's not just the only one who will only go on Fox News too. It's now even worse because of Fox News. So you have these people that will only speak there, and this is, I think, the Sarah Palin effect, right?
Yes.
She went out and talked to who was
Katie.
it? Katie Couric on CBS, right? And it was a disaster for her.
Yeah.
So she's going to want to keep her message, to preach to the choir.
Yeah.
It's a big choir at Fox News. Not going to be tough questions. So Engel's going to take that route. O'Donnell's already taking that route. Canceled all her appearances on network news stations.
Carl Palladino made the mistake of going on the Today Show this morning. And
Oh, did he?
Yes, and he immediately put his foot in his mouth because after insisting that he was very enlightened on LGBT issues, he started talking about how it was immoral and irresponsible for anybody to take their kids to a gay pride parade. And then went on and on about his, came across as a complete homophobe. So again, what happens with these candidates is if they do go on mainstream media, they very quickly hit that third rail.
Right.
Where they get off message, that they've been, they're not very good at staying disciplined. They say something like this, and right now it seems though as if Islam is really the whipping boy for a lot of this.
Yeah, it is. And actually there was a really good editorial in the Jerusalem Post from the other day about how in the United States, Islam is the one target that anybody can attack without having any consequences whatsoever. And that's why you hear the most absurd things being spewed by our political class and the pundits that support them. It's become really fair game, and much more so because it's an election year.
Well, look at during World War II, Japanese, the Huns, whatever. That was World War One actually.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was easy to do. Go back a little bit further, in some areas almost contemporaneously, African Americans.
Easy to mock them.
Easy to mock, be
yeah.
terrorized by them, and get away with it with no one ever saying anything to you about it.
Yeah, yeah. And fear is, an amazingly powerful driver in politics. It activates, I think, the sort of latent prejudices that people might have, the latent misconceptions that people might have. I actually show in my classrooms in anthropology, one of the first things I do is I show a film called Real Bad Arabs, which is based on a book by Jack Shaheen about how Hollywood depicts Arabs and Muslims. And the most striking thing for the kids is consistently when Shaheen talks about the opening to the film Aladdin, right? Which has a song about how it's, they'll cut off your nose, they'll cut off your hands, it's a barbaric place, but it's home, and, all of these sort of stereotypes in a children's movie.
Yeah.
And they sit there because these kids were raised on Aladdin, right? They were the ones that were watching it, and they're like, holy cow.
Well, the Schwarzenegger, Willis action movies, all the villains are Middle Eastern terrorists of that sort of thing, aren't they?
Yeah, sort of nebulous. And as the Cold War was coming to an end, there's sort of a blend of Islam and Crimson Jihad was, I think, Arnold Schwarzenegger's villains in one.
It's amazing.
Communist. But I do have, I want to say though, I have tremendous faith actually in the American people, and I have tremendous faith in their ability to be discerning and their ability to have a sense of fairness and to recognize, when they're being fed fear-mongering and hate. And I think that they do recognize it when they're given a chance, right?
I really think of Robert Frank's What's the Matter with Kansas, however, where he showed how potent a tool that is and how often people will vote against their own enlightened self-interest if they're afraid enough.
This is true.
One more terrorist incident, and I really do worry what happens in this country. I think another incident, however minor, it may not be the spectacular kind of incident we saw on 9/11, but if the Times Square bomber had succeeded in blowing up the automobile, I just think that would have heightened the paranoia to a new and extreme level. I am surprised that we are as fearful as we are. I actually thought we were a bit braver. So I'm not as optimistic, perhaps, because I don't think we're very brave anymore.
Well, see, I think you have to have the tools with which to think these things through, and I think by and large the American public isn't given those tools. I think the discussion that they had on ABC, they had some problems, but it was really the first extended discussion I had seen in the mainstream media. Kind of questioning this incredibly Islamophobic narrative, and a lot of the people that they had on there, who were saying yes, we should be afraid of Muslims, came off sounding like crackpots.
Except to their followers, yeah.
Except to their followers.
Right.
But I have faith that people, when they're exposed for what they are, can see that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, fear is a very potent weapon.
You're listening to WLNZ 89.7. I have to put that in periodically, or the FCC will come get us.
Okay.
We're afraid.
We're afraid. And my experience looking at the media is that I really believe what's happened is that in this quest for mythical objectivity, which was in many ways really a quest for trying to make the news so bland that you don't offend anybody because advertisers don't want to lose half their audience. The reality is that journalists are now in a position where they can't just simply turn around and say that's nuts, which I think they might have been willing to do 30 or 40 years ago. They asked Uncle Walter Cronkite once, what do you do when somebody is just blatantly lying to you, or they say something that's just completely crackpot? And he said, well, I just keep asking them the same question over and over again because I assume my audience is smart enough to know that I'm doing that because there's something wrong. And I thought, why can't you just say, That makes no sense. Tell me again. Do you really believe that? I mean, I think part of what has happened, it was what we saw in the debate last night. It's not challenging this. What is the best way to deal with this kind of situation? And sometimes if you push back, you just get backlash. You have to be careful not to ridicule people, or you just make them more firmly entrenched. How do we give people the tools to deal with this?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. I mean, first of all, programs like this one, right? Providing alternative sources of information. One of my big heroes is also, now I'm completely blanking her name now, Democracy Now!
Oh, yes. Yeah. I would know her name unless you had just asked me.
Yeah, and I still can't seem to place it.
It's old-timers disease is what I'm getting.
I'm beginning to suffer from that myself. But I mean, having those sort of alternative venues out there. I know people that just normal people that the mainstream media sort of dismisses, right, and talks down to, who actively watch Amy Goodman. That's
Amy
her
Goodman,
name.
yes.
They watch Amy Goodman religiously.
Yes.
And find that to be very positive. The second thing is, of course, education, right? We need to have a very serious sort of engagement in our public universities about these sorts of issues. I take that very, very seriously. But the third thing is really sunlight.
True.
Right? Shedding the sunlight on these people. Who are they? Where are they getting their money from? What are their credentials?
Welcome
How are
to
they
the Koch
related
brothers.
to each other? And yeah, the Koch brothers, all these other huge foundations that are funding these people. When you think about the people that led the fight against the Ground Zero Victory Mosque,
Yes.
who are they funded by? And you find out that it's very conservative multimillionaires, and the richest people in the country are funding these people. A lot of it, oil money,
Yes.
right? And we can imagine why oil money would have an interest in the demonization of Muslims.
And we
Right.
now see the concerns about the role of places like the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, with foreign money being pumped into advertising where we have no idea what the sources are.
Oh, absolutely. And we find the same thing. I mean, I don't know if you remember here in Lansing, just before the last election, the Obsession CD that was sent around.
Did you see one?
Oh, yeah.
Were you able? Oh, tell us.
My students actually insisted that I show it in class to be fair and balanced in my own classroom.
What was it? Explain to our listeners.
It was a documentary format that brought together a whole series of so-called experts and whatnot. Just before the election, it was produced and distributed through major newspapers in swing states all around the country, and the Lansing State Journal was paid to run it, and they did. And it is the point by point, just incredible misinformation and scaremongering. Palestinians and Muslims are the equivalent of Nazis, and they want to destroy America and American values, and I mean the whole 9 yards. And it was what was it called? Obsession. Obsession.
I remember it now.
Did you get one?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got one, and I showed it to my class. I said, "Sure, let's watch it." And luckily, my students were smart enough.
They
to
could
say
see the tricks and the
they could-
manipulation.
Yeah, and they were I think very astute in picking it apart. There were certain believers who really wanted to believe it. But I think the majority of students, my sense was anyway, saw it very differently. And you can actually go, there's now a website countering obsession, by the way, which I wanted to mention. It's www.obsessionforhate.com.
Bonnie, one of the things that I still look back at was the success of the Dave Edgar's thing.
The Dave Eggers.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that whole thing, all that thought went into that, about using this as a tool, but it was it could be very successful in that freshman class, that discussion that they had.
East Lansing did the One Book, One
Book.
Community, brought in Dave Eggers, and they also brought in the Zaytoun family to
Right.
talk about what had happened. And I was stunned at the turnout the night that the Zaytoun spoke There were,
800 people.
800 or 900 people, and they kept bringing in more chairs, and more people kept arriving. So there's clearly, I think in an educated college town like East Lansing, there's automatically an understanding about how dangerous this could be and why we need to do something about it. But it's not clear to me. It's very hard to get some of this information out into rural areas in particular.
Yeah.
I know when I did work monitoring the Michigan militia and other militias here in the state of Michigan, mostly rural based. A lot of people who live down in the country not as familiar with issues. It's really teaching those skills of critical thinking and getting kids in school. I worry a little bit about the homeschooling movement, because it really can narrow the perspective that a lot of young people are growing up with.
Yeah, certainly.
Well, one of the things that Dave said too, and it actually has stuck with me, and I've done it recently, which is going to get me in a lot of trouble. But I think he was pointing out that you have to stand up. When you hear or see something, you have to say something.
It's that bystander problem.
That's what his point. I mean, everything else that was his point. You have to step up and say that's not right.
Yeah.
And I've done this just a couple of times with a lot of issues lately, and it's not well received. I notice for some reason we've gotten less combative. We really have. I was polite, but...
And we have to give people the tools so that they can stand out. How do you help your students do that?
Well, I asked them the tough questions, and I press them to I work them to death. They don't like me, but I make them read like math.
Sort of a badge of honor.
And, I take it very seriously. I don't want them to like me. I want them to learn something. But I do. I give them critical things to read. I take the time, put together. I think it was the Israeli, the last attack on Gaza a couple of years back. At the beginning of the semester, I was teaching a geography class that semester. And so I prepared for the students, a series of articles from all across the spectrum of Israeli politics.
Oh, interesting.
Right? And I said, this is something that we're going to come back to over and over and over. I said, read these 5 articles and tell me which one is the Isραeli point of view.
Oh.
Right?
Because there is no the Israeli point of view.
Exactly, and they have to think about it. And then I can do the same thing with, Islam. You can do the same thing with the Arab nationalists. You can really pick these things apart.
Do it with the United States public policy.
Oh, you can certainly do it, yeah.
Where are we?
What does it mean?
I'm concerned about the narrowing of the debate in our culture. I think of someone like Noam Chomsky, who's so well known around the world and such a noted speaker, and he has been invited and then disinvited on public radio numerous times. He never really gets a platform here, so it's hard to have a truly broad debate in the culture. It seems to me it gets stuck at a certain point and doesn't go any further left than one point, and we seem to be moving further and further to the right as a result.
Right. Yeah, I agree, and I think one of the biggest things I tell my students is it's not that we have a left-wing media and a right-wing media. It's not that there's a liberal media. It's that there's a corporate media.
Absolutely.
And more corporate than ever.
And more corporate than ever. And so there's a whole series of filters there that prohibit us before you even get to the commercial advertising format.
Except when it was hers.
Oh, yeah.
When he could actually start wars.
Right.
Well, we used to have a partisan press and they duked it out. But then when they realized they were losing half their audience, they went for a blander middle road where, instead we were going to see elections turn on things like did somebody call someone else a whore or not in an off moment.
Right.
We focus on trivia because it's titillating but safer rather than dealing with some of the tough issues we have. Although if they made me watch too many of those debates as we did last night, I might really need Novocaine to get through them.
Or you'd quit voting, which would be worse.
It does depress the vote.
Dang.
Right.
Well, I hope this is just the beginning of a conversation with you. This is Dr. Mujib Hourani from Michigan State University's Department of Anthropology. This is an issue we want to return to frequently, not only because it's an important issue in general, but because Michigan is a state with a very large Muslim population, and I think it's particularly painful for people in our culture to wake up in the morning and see themselves vilified as they have recently in this campaign cycle.
It is. It's very hurtful, and people are hurting.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
And we are going to be joined now by Kevin Breen and Patrick Cook, 2 authors. And they're going to double up on a microphone because we have one good mic and one not so hot. So we're going to have you join us on this one mic. And you're going to be telling us and maybe doing a little bit of reading. Bill will do some introduction because he knows more about your writings than I do. He's been writing about you for Mint and Lit.
And interestingly enough, I don't know which one is Kevin.
That's Kevin.
And which one was Patrick, in case I hadn't met him in person. If you could come a little bit this way. Yeah, like that mic is not very good.
Okay.
But basically they're postal workers, which I think in a lot of ways have been maligned across the country. What they're doing in town today is John Beck, with his program Daily Work, Our Daily Life, invited them to give a presentation today at noon about mixing work and writing, and that's one of John's big deals in life. And it's because work is so important to us. It's part of who we are, and what John tries to do is try to find writers who are writing about work, and then bring them in, let people listen to them, find out why they did that, and that's why they're here tonight. And we also want both you gentlemen at one point were writing about where you worked, weren't you?
Yes, as a matter of fact, yeah. In fact, in these two stories, this is a little booklet that they published. Workers Write is a magazine, and they published this one of mine. And of course, Kevin's also takes place almost entirely on the working floor. This one's entirely on the working floor, and so is Kevin's. And it is unusual. Writing's very frequently about love, which is fine. But and
There's more to life than love.
There's more to life, yeah, absolutely. So
not all writing's a love story, as I've heard some novelists say.
Yeah. Not as much as in music, I guess. Writing tends to.
Did you two ever work together?
We did, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
We had worked together for probably 5 or 10 years. I worked at the post office 30 years. Pat worked about 20 years, and there was a period where we worked pretty much on the same shift and worked together, I believe.
I have a question for you. Now, Pat, you told me a story. Can I talk about it?
Sure.
Okay. Why don't you tell the story about how you first met each other and an interesting thing that happened on the way to meet each other?
It's a kind of a funny story, and I think Kevin knows it pretty
We
well.
hope.
But we'll see. I had a rough time starting at the post office. Certain neurological difficulties I have made it difficult for me to be a carrier. And I was writing at the time. I wrote this nice story, and there's a local competition. We have an arts festival every June in Grand Rapids, and there's a literary component to it. And I entered. I pinned a lot of hopes on it because, of course, I wasn't doing very well in the job. And when I got the newspaper with all the stories in it, Kevin had won. It just said Kevin, somebody I didn't know, but it said Kevin Breed's a postal worker. Not only could I not get my job at the post office, but another postal worker won the prize that I thought was rightfully mine. Well, I got over it. And
After
so
you sent him the hate letter.
Vonnegut wrote this story, by the way.
so when we finally did meet on the working floor, because I was reinstated and I had a job that was more suited for me, a mail handler rather than a carrier. I didn't mention any of this to Kevin. I just, I read your story, the one you won for. Very good. It was a good story. It was better than mine, let's face it. That's why it won. And so we talked about writing and traded stories and so on. At one point, Kevin and I both drove to Iowa, and we're at the writers' workshop there
Were
for a
you?
week. Yeah.
Oh,
So
excellent.
that was a nice thing. Well, okay, now skip forward 19 years to 2008, and I retired, and I won the Calder Prize that year.
Did you enter as well?
I think after a while I probably stopped entering. I guess.
He won 3 or 4 times. He's really
One
good.
too many times.
But I never won before. so that was great. And that story that I had lost after 19 years of revision and messing with it and agonizing over it, that got published the same year. So it all worked out for the best.
Kevin, are you still with the post office?
I still work at the post office. I've been there about 30 years, and I have about 5 more years to go. So yes.
May I ask something, because we just ran into a person who talked to us about her experiences at the post office, and they were not pleasant. I don't know, as a form, maybe it's not right to ask the current employee and get you into trouble, but are post offices in general difficult culturally? Are they not pleasant places to work anymore?
I would say no, that's not true. I think most post offices, I work the window, so I'm dealing with the public, and I would say most people that come in enjoy coming into the post office, and most experiences and encounters are very pleasant and go very well, but not all of them do, and people do occasionally get mad and feel that, you know, we're telling them to do things that they shouldn't have to do or something, but we do have to follow certain rules, and so maybe people resent that. I'm not sure, but by and large, most encounters at the windows with the public are very pleasant.
What about at the backside of the post office?
With
Isn't there
other
a sense
workers?
that there's a lot of speed up and a lot of pressure to perform as budgets get tight?
Yeah, it has changed a lot in the last few
cut
years.
They cut jobs
yeah.
back. They have has to do more with fewer people,
Yeah.
and it's difficult to adjust sometimes. You know, so yeah, there's anger.
Do you write about that culture and that job in your writing?
Not as much, I don't believe. I think Pat's story deals with that more than mine does. Mine is more a story that's, I'm looking for a story and deciding to set it where I'm looking for a place to set it. It doesn't necessarily have to be the post office. This story that I read today at the meeting, the post office was a good setting for it, but I was really more concerned with the story than anything, whereas I think Pat's story really deals with those issues specifically.
I'm going to leave this copy here so that you guys can.
Good.
Thank you. It's called Overtime. I think maybe we should let each of them read a little portion
I
of...
would love to.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
too.
Sure.
Well, I'm not going to read from this one. I've got another story.
Why don't you go? Doesn't matter. Why don't you go first, Ken?
Okay, I will go first then. I will just start with the start of my story, I guess.
This is WLNZ 89.7. Kevin Breen is going to be, what is the title?
The title is Roger and Jodine. Okay. Roger Pepper worked the night shift at the big Central Michigan post office, and for the first 9 years, from 1980 to 1988, we figured we pretty much had his number. He stood 6'3" with sturdy legs and broad shoulders and a round head topped with tight blonde curls. For such a large-boned man, he had small, almost delicate facial features, finely sculpted ears, thin lips, a button nose. He had an unfortunate habit of wearing his jeans or his green work pants belted 3 inches too high in his waist, and though he was teased about this, he didn't seem to care. Much to our amusement, he had a tendency to drone on in a slow, deep voice about certain pet peeves, the colossal stupidity of management, or the maddening quirks of his co-workers. Roger wasn't much interested in the larger world of politics, art, ecology, music, history, etc. His main area of interest was sports. He followed and bet on all of the professional Michigan sport teams, especially his beloved Detroit Pistons. And though he wasn't particularly athletic, he pitched on 2 softball teams, carried a 179 average on the Post Office Bowling League, had a tricky spinning serve in tennis, and played a bruising, muscular, graceless game of basketball. Despite his flaws, over the years he had dated several attractive, spirited women from work. At the time this story begins, Roger was seeing Karen Leonard, a full-bodied brunette with a lazy eye who loved flashy clothes in the style of Liberace or Elton John. We expected Roger, like most of us, would lead a comfortable, unremarkable life. Then Jodine Hiller arrived and changed everything. Jodine came to work at the CMPO at the nubile age of 21. She was tall, about 5'9", and lithe, and she pranced on her toes over the workroom floor with a combination of youthful beauty and effortless confidence. Her long straight hair, the color of a backlit premium Pilsner, framed a narrow, elongated face and fell over her shoulders to the middle of her supple back. Her eyes were the fickle green of lake water in shifting sunlight. She wore tight designer jeans, white tennis shoes, and linen blouses embroidered with flowers or butterflies. Within 2 nights of her arrival at the post office, every man on the night shift with a wandering eye, from 20 to 50, single or married, had checked her out and considered his chances. At least 3 or 4 times a week, she was propositioned. She turned down all offers with a firm, aloof poise. We hardly noticed when Roger first started talking with Jodine, since we considered her out of his league. Perhaps he helped her carry a tray of letters to her case one night, and then maybe a night or two later he sat at a letter case beside her and they began to talk. Whenever we heard her quiet laugh, Roger always seemed to be around. We half noticed how she always chose to work next to Roger, that they began walking out to the parking lot together after work, and that they often strolled into the post office together. It took us a while to get our heads wrapped around the idea of Jodine and Roger. It was like seeing something: a man in fishnet stockings, a woman with a heavy mustache, a child in a wheelchair, that the brain at first resists. So this basically is a story about Roger and Jodine, and it takes
And I
it
know
goes
those
on
people.
about
I know
25
them.
years, so it's a long story.
Where
about
can
them.
we read this?
This is not published, so I've been sending it out to journals and hope to get it published, but right now it's currently unpublished.
Wonderful.
Very good. It's interesting.
I'm trying to get him to send it to this.
Yeah,
Ah,
which I will.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's difficult, even short stories, because there's a lot of outlets for them, but there's so many people writing them, it's difficult to get them published still.
Yeah.
Have you thought of putting it up on Amazon and a 99.9?
I wonder. I don't know that much about. Basically, I'm an old-fashioned guy, and
Mm.
send them into journals and hope to get them published. But yeah, there are new avenues now that there weren't before.
I'd download it.
Yeah, I think that's going to become more common. I mean, that's going to
Yeah, I
become
think
almost
so,
the way
too.
we do things.
Patrick.
Okay, well, I'm going to read just the last third of a story. The way the story is set up is that there's a scene in 1958, a scene in 1968, and now a scene in 1978. So it's 2 young men, brothers. Barney and I parked on the upper dock of the post office. He worked there, and so did his girlfriend, Cecilia. When we went up to the dock, she was waiting for us. "Hey, sweetie," she said, "who's your handsome friend?" "Cecilia, meet Tom O'Reilly, a gentleman at all times. Tom, Cecilia Kaminsky." I stuck out my hand. "Very happy to meet you, finally." She shook my hand and said, "Your brother's quite the worker, you know." "Oh, I didn't know. I always thought him was a bum." "He's no bum. They sent 2 people up here tonight to take his place." She looked at Barney. "Hey, I got some bad news. They're going to keep us for a little longer. We'll have to work right up to dispatch time." "Oh, geez," Barney said. 1 o'clock? No, early dispatch, not the Indy." "That's no problem." Cecilia laughed at him. "But 1 o'clock would be, huh?" "Sweetheart, I would wait for you until 4 a.m. I would wait until 4 a.m. tomorrow. But I have to think of my little brother here who was anxious to meet Lenore. She's still coming, right?" "Oh, yeah," said Cecilia. "We'll be ready for a couple of drinks after 9 hours in this hellhole." "Okay, see you in a while." We sat in the car for a few minutes. I said, "Why don't you marry her anyway? It's pretty slick the way they work it. You just stand up at the front of church, and her father walks her up to the aisle and hands her over. You don't have to do a thing." "I am considering that. All in good time, my little ragamuffin. And another thing, where did you ever get the reputation as a worker?" "I learned 2 things in the Navy. One was how to drink shots of bourbon, and the other was the meaning of a day's work. I chipped and wire brushed and painted my ass off. In 1971, I personally painted 1/3 of USS America's conning tower. Nothing between me and the flight deck but a bosun's chair. Jeez, old Chief Mankiewicz. He gave us a day off during a typhoon once, but that was it. The Navy was the right choice for me. Better than the Army or the Marine Corps." We got tired of sitting in the car, and I suggested a walk around the parking ramp. We walked over to the edge. Ice crystals sparkled in the dock lights, and the snow crunched and squeaked under our feet. When we looked down toward the street, there was a crew from the electric company, still trying to repair the lines after the ice storm 2 days before. "Check that out," I said. "Man, those guys have probably been out there 48 hours. I wouldn't do that job." "Look who it is," Barney said, "right by the pole." "Whoa, that's Uncle Brian. So there's 2 reasons not to work for the electric company. You might have to work on a night like this, and he might be your supervisor." We watched him for a while. There was 1 man up on the pole and 2 others holding lines attached to a safety harness. Uncle Brian was gesturing like an umpire calling a base runner safe. He was saying something, too, which I couldn't catch. "Look at him," I said, "still clowning around. I can't believe it. At a time like this, it's prime time for accidents when everybody's tired. But he's playing around like there's something you're not getting. Look at that guy up on the pole. Watch his face. The man on the pole was beaming at Uncle Brian. Clearly he trusted him with his life. Judging by the other men's expressions, they felt the same way. You see that, Brian said? They can't get distracted because he's keeping up that pattern. The guy's a freaking Zen master. I laughed. Uncle Brian, the Zen master? Let me run that by Aunt Maggie. She may realize it or not. It doesn't matter. The guy's completely in the moment. He's not thinking about how tired he is or cold or anything, but staying safe and doing his job. We watched as the man on the pole fixed whatever was wrong and climbed down. Neither of us said a word to Uncle Brian.
Both of you have written about what goes on at work in a very unique way.
That's a tradition that I'm so glad to see. I mean, Michigan has formed some great writers. I mean, I think of Rivethead and his remembrances of the auto industry. I mean, I think it's just great to document this. It's wonderful. I'm sorry there aren't more outlets. Yours is being published. Give us the name of the publication again.
This is actually Workers' Right, which is a magazine out of Plano, Texas, and he gets a broad job category like hospital workers, say, or government worker. He publishes stories, but if he gets one that's too long for his magazine, like this is 5,000 words,